Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tomáš Vryba, and my pleasure and honor is to introduce 5 very specific special guests, and they will share with us their life stories. All of them are brave defenders of human rights and democracy. And if we were discussing this morning how our democracy is in decline, and how to improve our democracy, we forget somehow about the fact that there is a lot of countries where our imperfect democracies is something like a distant dream only. So that is the main difference. And the following 1 hour will be stories of people who are trying to promote democracy and human rights in less privileged corners of the world. The format is a gallery, which means everyone will be given 10 minutes floor for her or his story. There will be no time for questions and answers, so please be attentive in listening to very, very special stories. Our first guest is someone with very specific personal history. It's Dr. Nada Dhaif from Bahrain, and she was actually one of fighters for democracy in 2011 in her own country. She's a physician, she's a specialist in oral and dental surgery, and along with other 20 physicians, she was arrested and tortured, and as a result of that, she decided to found a Bahrain Rehabilitation and Anti-Violence Organization, Bravo, and I'm glad to give her the floor.
Thank you, Thomas. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here again. I was here in 2012. Right here, the stage was with the Dalai Lama, and it was an amazing experience. As I was introduced, I'm a doctor from Bahrain. My name is Nada. Thank you. He called me a fighter for democracy. But I would rather best call myself as a healer. That's what I do. I heal. So my story began in 2011, when the whole Arab Spring started, from Tunisia to Egypt to Syria. You know, somehow it landed in Bahrain, in my country. What happened is people went and protested. There always was an iconic place, like a square, where people go and protest in it. So you understand there will be some casualties, some injured people. Few people died. As a result, myself and some other doctors, we decided to go and help injured protesters, and we started a field hospital. A month or so went by, and the authorities decided that we had enough with the protesters. You know what? Go home. They cracked down on the protest. Everybody forcefully went back home. What happened is, shockingly, what happened was they went first after the doctors. We were about 50 doctors who were jailed. I was the first female detainee. I was the first, so I didn't know what to expect. To be frank with you, I thought that was a mistake. My detention, arresting me, coming after me was a mistake. You know, what did I do? Nothing. We only healed people. So I was arrested, kept in a solitary confinement, tortured, electrocuted. The whole thing took around 2 months. Afterwards, I was taken to a military trial. As such, I was sentenced for 15 years imprisonment. Yeah, that was really shocking. Even at that time, I didn't believe it. I thought the whole thing was a joke. Maybe that thing helped me in going on and absorbing the trauma of the torture, the trauma of the pain, the trauma of the long years of sentencing. My lawyer at that time advised me not to speak to the media, not to speak to the press, not to appear on TV. But the moment I received the 15 years imprisonment, you know what? I said, I am speaking out. So, from a military trial, with the international pressure, of course, we were moved to appeal court in a civilian court, at which I was acquitted. But my story really began when I was at prison, when I was imprisoned. I had to endure all this pain, all this psychological trauma. It was devastating. It was like someone has tearing you apart, and you don't know in which way you'll be fixed again. So I decided, once I leave prison, I will go out and I'll seek professional help. And shockingly again, when I left my cell out and I breathed the air of freedom, temporary freedom, there was no centers, no facilities, no whatsoever to receive cases such my case. I was lucky my travel ban was left. Few months later, I went to the States and Europe, and I got myself the necessary rehabilitation. And I decided to start Bravo. Bravo is Bahrain Rehabilitation and Anti-Violence Organization, at which we give people hope. People who were subjected to torture. People who have faced the same pain that I went through. We tell them, and we teach them, and we give them techniques and remedies that takes them out of self-pity, out of the trauma, out of the victimhood. And we tell them, hey, move on. Pain was your biggest teacher, as it was mine. But it changed me. It has transformed me completely and totally. It made me a stronger person, a powerful person. So this is my story, basically. So I am a healer. I'm not a fighter. I leave it to the people to fight. It's up to them if they want to fight. But they have to be enabled first. They need to know that there is someone who cares and someone to support them. As I was lucky enough to have my family to support me during my movement, as I was lucky enough to have groups, doctors all over the world to protest and exert pressure on their government to call for my release. So you know what? You matter. Everyone here matters. Your voices matter. You're standing up for people like me, and people in my country really matters. I thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Dr. Dhaif was too modest to claim that she is not a fighter. She is a very brave freedom fighter. And fighting for freedom, fighting for human rights needs three qualities. And it is courage, it is expertise, and it is dedication. And I believe that all our guests are good examples of these three qualities used in the right direction. You have different ways of fighting for human rights. It may be political activism, but it may be also artistic expression. And that is the case of our second speaker, Tania Bruguera from Cuba. She's a well-known, internationally respected artist. And she started with performances and installations in open space. Later on, she started to actually point at very important facts of social life and political life. So her work now often exposes social effects of political forces and present global issues like power, migration, censorship, and repression. She was also arrested several times because of her activities, and now she'll be willing to share with us her story. Please.
I want to thank Forum 2000. I'm an admirer of Václav Havel. He's one of my heroes, so for me it means a lot to be here. My story is quite long. It's more than 25 years of censorship in the arts with the Cuban government. It is a story where I have been once and again disappointed by the difference between what the government says and what they do. I want to focus in only one event that I had to deal with. A few years ago, in 2014, December 17, I was in Italy because I had a show, an international exhibition, and I decided to go to see the Pope in this open arena. And as soon as I see this, I receive a text from my sister who said, Tania, Cuba and the US are friends now. It was a big shock in a good way. We were like, it is one of those moments that you know is historical. You might not know why yet, but you know it's going to make a difference. Immediately, I had a lot of sentiments and feelings inside me, so I decided to write a letter directed to Obama, the Pope, and Raúl, the three elements of this change, and send it to my sister and a friend. One of them decided that they liked it very much, this letter, decided to put it on Facebook, and the letter said all the time, I demand. So I demanded the Cuban government to give us reasons of what was going to happen to Cuba after, to give us some reassurance of what is going to happen with people's life after this big change, and also to ask for them to give us the chance to speak our mind about what was happening in Cuba. Of course, what happened was that my friend put it on Facebook on the hashtag I also demand. And in less than a week, we have almost 20,000 people following this letter. It was very impressive because it was the first time in the very polarized Cuban discussion where people from all political arenas and all political colors came together to discuss in Facebook what they thought was the future of Cuba. Of course, we were always very surprised. We created a group of activists, cyber activists, to support this initiative. At the end of the letter, I suggested that what we need is to put a microphone in the Revolution Square so every Cuban could have 1 minute to say what they think about the future of the country and what was their image of the concept of the Cuban nation for the future. What happened was, when you have 20,000 people in Facebook, or 20,000 plus, and people say, yes, we need to put the microphone. As an artist who do political art, you have to put the microphone in the Revolution Square. You cannot say, sorry, it's too dangerous. Sorry, I didn't mean it. People have trust your ideas, and they want the idea to happen. Then I decided to, when I returned to Cuba, to do it. Of course, it was, I'm going to make the story short, it was a lot of negotiation with the Cuban government. They always say no, no, no to everything. I negotiated. I am an artist, so I have to negotiate all the time, my projects. At the end, I was, okay, we do it on the Revolution Square, but inside an institution. And they say, aha, but we have the right to admit who we want. And I say, no, I'm not going to censor the audience of the work. So I say, I'm not doing it, or we do it in the Revolution Square, or we don't do it. What follows is a long story of detentions, political assassination, personality assassination, and so on. But one thing I want to share. When I first proposed this project, a lot of people in politics were laughing and saying art cannot change anything. Well, I tell you, art might not change the world, but at least can change people's habit, political habits. And that's what we did. When we decided to call for all Cubans to go there, we had almost 100 people from very different places coming, from which 83 were in prison on top of me. And what we had is maybe one of the first times the Cuban government was clearly demonstrated to the Cuban government clearly that the people can and will speak. And the people have said, it's enough. We want to say what we want to you. I had multiple interrogation sessions. It was, as you, very difficult to get out of them after. But one thing I learned that injustice is something that you feel in your body. It's not a concept that you read in a book. It's something that you feel and that you take with you. I also learned that what rights are. Because when you don't have it, you know you don't have it. And you can see every day how they're stripped of you. But something interesting happened. I'm on more than 30 interrogation sessions and a lot of persecution that I still have in Cuba. I realized in one of the interrogation sessions that my interrogator had to learn, because the piece was called Tatlin Whisper, in reference to the Russian artist Vladimir Tatlin. So she had to learn to Wikipedia what it meant, who is Tatlin. And then I had a little bulb and say, oh, watch out. I can actually use the interrogation to teach them something. And then I decided that after that, that I was going to do the Institute of Artivism Hannah Arendt, and I was going to do the reading of the origins of totalitarianism in my house, because at least if they wanted to bring me to another interrogation session or to jail again, they had to read at least one paragraph, which I hoped they would learn something after that. Things had continued happening. The Institute is still happening. We're bringing artists and activists from all over the world to Cuba to share their experiences with Cuban younger artists. And one thing that we have learned is the Cuban government always have a solution for all their problems. The solution is always repression. What has happened is a lot of young artists started to have the independent galleries, independent cinema production companies, music companies. So they have decided to create the Decree 349, which is a decree where you cannot do any activity that is artistic without the government giving you the permission to do so. So basically the Cuban government solution has been to legalize censorship. My question to you is the following. We are a group of artists, a group of activists who are fighting this law for the first time in many, many years. I can see probably in the 60s. Artists from all over had joined. People who are more with the government, people who are less with the government, people who are rich artists, people who are poor artists, independent artists, ones that are not so independent, have joined against this decree. My question is, why is it that the Cuban government always have a special treatment? Why is it that when you talk about Venezuela, you don't talk about the militarization that is brought by the Cuban government into Venezuela. Why it is, when you talk about North Korea, you don't talk about the Cuban government selling weapons to North Korea. I know they are all and they might not work, but they were doing it. Why it is that when you talk about Brazil, you don't talk about Petrobras and the relationship with the Cuban government and the corruption case where Cuban government is also involved. So what happened in Cuba today is we don't have solidarity. We are alone, activists who are alone, and the government do not recognize us as activists because we are not allowed to be activists in Cuba. We can only be opposition, as Václav Havel said. They are not letting us bring issues that for any other country would be a legitimate issue to confront your government. You only have the option to be opposition. So I please invite you today to be with us, and when you think about Cuba, forget the beach, forget the dancing, forget the happy faces, because sometimes those happy faces are hiding the pain. Sometimes you dance because you have nothing else to do. Maybe you don't have nothing to eat, and then you say, okay, let's have fun at least. You know, so please, try to be in solidarity with the artists in Cuba, because we are the revolution that is coming. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It was a great example of possibility to use arts in fight for freedom, and political activism is now a part of not just people who are dedicated to fight by themselves, but the way of including other people, co-patriots, and as Tania puts it, to change viewers into citizens. Thank you for that. Now we will listen to another story, and if Tania was speaking about art, we have Professor Qiang, who is for the time being the professor at Berkeley School of Information, the publisher and editor of China Digital Times, and he is following for long decades already the measures of Chinese government, their control of internet and of social media. So please, Professor, floor is yours.
Good afternoon. It is special to be here. The reason is this is Prague, and this is the legacy of Václav Havel. Where to start? I was born in 1961 in China. So when I was starting to remember everything, when I was 5 years old or 6 years old, it's a cultural revolution in China. My parents were intellectuals, and the whole family was sent to the countryside. Like millions and millions of Chinese during that time, I grew up in the darkest time of the history of China, and to some degree, one of the darkest time in the human world, humankind. But from there, the dictator Mao Zedong died, and the China became more and more open, more and more hopeful. I became one of the first generation of the students after college students, after the Cultural Revolution, into the university, one of China's elite science university, University of Science and Technology of China, studied physics, 1979. At a time, and the entire 80s, that was a time when China had more hope. Everything's becoming more and more liberalized, and the youth was hoping the country to become the better. It was a hopeful period, and I was studying science, and even more and more opening of the country, that for first time after the communist China, that the students can study abroad by themselves. And I became, again, one of the first generation of Chinese students studied in the graduate school in the United States, doing my doctorate degree astrophysics. That was in 1986. I came to the United States doing my PhD. Then, 1989, I was in the middle of doing my astrophysics experiment. It's on TV, students' demonstration in Tiananmen Square, in the city of Beijing, where I came from. I was watching my fellow students, their hunger strikers, the citizens to support them, and the soldiers came in, the tanks came in, the gunshot, and the deaths. That was the moment I was half of the world away doing the astrophysics experiment. But a moment of clarity in my life that I need to be back to China. I want to be with my people in my city at this time. I don't know what I could do, but at least I want to be with them, facing the tyranny, and tell them I'm not afraid. So one day later, I get on an airplane from Chicago to Seattle, Seattle to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to Beijing. And by the last stop, I was the only one on the airplane flying that direction. I was 28 at the time. This is almost 30 years ago. That trip changed my life. I visited friends, I visited victims. I was on the street, face to face to the soldier. And I finally got back to the United States 2 months later, became a full-time activist. I still haven't finished my physics PhD. So next 12 years, I became a full-time human rights activist in Washington, D.C. for 2 years, in New York for the next 12 years. I founded an organization called Human Rights in China with Chinese students, Chinese scientists, human rights activists, documenting human rights violations, speaking at Geneva, at the UN, and Washington, D.C., and Brussels, and established research offices in Hong Kong, and a vast network of political prisoners and their families to provide humanitarian aid to those families inside of China. This is the time that China also has been changing. This is after the Eastern Europe and Soviet Union fell. The whole world thought that China is inevitable to become another Soviet Union and becoming a democracy. And the people like us fighting human rights from the exile also expect that day will come soon that we can go home. China has been changing economically, socially, tremendously. So even the political repression has been continuous throughout the 90s, but China's gradually getting into the world. And we still hope with this economic growth that young generation grow up and the new hope for democracy will be finally realized in Chinese society. Although I have been working in exile for more than 10 years, and I watched a new hope, which is the internet, the digital revolution. So first time that we thought, we have a media. The first time I thought, this technology will empower the people. The first time I see that the freedom of information and freedom of expression and the capacity of collective action will finally reach to the Chinese society. And that's exciting, and that's the hope. I had a wonderful opportunity to teach at UC Berkeley at the beginning of the School of Journalism. And I started a website called China Digital Times, which followed the China digital revolution, particularly on the side of political impact and democratization of Chinese society. Soon, my focus became how the Chinese government also controls the internet, suppressing the information, blocking and filtering the online traffic. But I also watched the hopeful activities from Chinese netizens, hundreds of thousands of them, millions of them, speaking of the truth, circulating information, connecting themselves, bringing the new hope in the Chinese society. So from 2001 to all the way to 2011, that whole decade, the internet is growing in China, while I'm monitoring the censorship and suppression and propaganda and teaching classes in UC Berkeley called digital activism, and watching that China, this boom of the internet, pervasive in the society, and the changes bringing, and the dynamics between the censorship and the resistance. But since 2012, the Chinese new president, Xi Jinping, stepped into power. He struck back to the internet. He was determined to hold on the authoritarian rule, the monopoly of the power of the Chinese Communist Party. But also, in the technology, I see a tremendous shift. Now, today, we all see it. Internet and digital technology is not only empowering the people and ordinary users, it's empowering the ruling elite, empowering the big institution, the large corporation, the state, particularly in an authoritarian state like China. They realize in the era of Internet of Things, big data, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, this provided an unprecedented tool to build a total surveillance state, which China is well on its way. You can read today from Economist, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, the New York Times, the reporting about social credit system in China, the facial recognition, the artificial intelligence-enabled online surveying, and the government collecting the citizens' biometrics. And more importantly, its Chinese government, under the current president, is determined to maintain its authoritarian rule in China indefinitely. And with its rising digital totalitarian challenge, with its accumulated wealth and development of technology, not only China's democracy is still far away, but also exporting its influence around the world. I see my time is up, but my time back to China is still remote. Almost 30 years in exile, and I see China as a rising challenge to democracy globally and continue to be an even more repressive state, despite all the economic growth that in front of me, my road to home, back, and in front of the entire world. But I do not, my time's up, and I do not want to leave a pessimistic note in front of you. So I'm going to read a quote from Gandhi. Actually, my phone is not working. I'm just trying to remember. Gandhi once said, "When I despair, I try to remember. In human history, love and the truth always win. Yes, we have tyranny. We have murderers. At the time, they were all seen invincible. But at the end, they all fail. Think about it. They always fail." Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Now we'll can invite the next speaker. It's Mr. Erkin Gadirli. He is a co-founder of Republican Alternative political party in Azerbaijan. In the 1990s, he was lecturing law at the university in Baku, and later on he represented his country in different international institutions. But as we all know, the situation in Azerbaijan is more often than ever criticized by observers from outside. So please, Mr. Gadirli, will you be willing to tell us how difficult situation in your country is now? We also have a news for you that Mr. Gadirli will present a short movie before he takes the floor.
This video addressed to the participants of the Forum 2000. I must begin with a thank you word to all those people in the global community of promoters of democracy who kept my case in the focus of public attention for so many years. Many of them, I presume, are in this hall right now. Thank you very much. In 2003, a few months before the father-to-son succession of power in Azerbaijan, the US Senator John McCain visited our capital city, Baku, and met here with 3 then-leading opposition parties. As a junior politician, I told him that the comprehensive foreign support to the said succession was something that would further disenchant the people. To his credit, upon his return to the United States, Senator McCain made a critical public statement dissonant with George W. Bush's choice to support the dynastic rule, and had been vocal on the downward path of democratic institutions in our country since then. At the time, the great powers believed that an educated English-speaking son of an authoritarian ruler would become a reformer. Today, when President Aliyev II has brought Azerbaijan to the verge of exclusion from the Council of Europe, I see that some external forces are willing to repeat the mistake of the year 2003. This time they seem to feel affection for one part of the ruling family against another. This is driven by the same mistaken vision that someone from within the corrupt dynastic oligarchy inflated on steroids of oil and gas revenue may become a reformer even without a proven ability to compete in a democratic race. That is a direct path to even greater repression. We have seen that in the example of Ilham Aliyev, who has been less skilled than his father, less competitive, and therefore more repressive. Even worse repressions is going to happen if the clandestine policy of supporting a convenient dictator continues this time in a different edition. We in the Republican Alternative are working to gain support of the same middle class which some external planners believe should support the second dynastic succession. We are aware of the economic roots of that social group not always being healthy. Currently, those roots are too much dependent on the government's wasteful spending of oil and gas revenue. However, that class is just tired of the system in which their economic rights are not protected, in which they always have to demonstrate political loyalty, and yet that demonstration is not a guarantee of their security. Like communism, the system takes just too many evenings. In a typical Azerbaijani middle-class family, when it comes to assessment of risks of their occupation, Plan B usually is not about changing professional priorities or business plan, but about emigration. We are willing to create for them a talent-rewarding system in the economy and in the government so that they stay and move our country forward. Due to our perseverance in this fight for democracy, the Republican Alternative has achieved a level of name recognition sufficient to launch a victorious election campaign. Not only we are widely recognized, but the vast majority of people who recognize our platform are inclined to vote for us. Our task of building up on that reputation is undermined by continuous harassment by the authorities, such as travel ban and administrative arrests of activists. The government has been doing a number of silly things in a smart way, with reliance on oil revenue-based social contract and some corrupt internationals. However, their revenue is falling and its corrupt international support base is also being exposed and thrown out of politics. The latter is, to a large extent, due to our efforts and international solidarity we're receiving from the Western democratic circles. Taking this opportunity to speak to the true friends of democratic progress in Azerbaijan, I would like to emphasize that Republican Alternative will continue its pursuit of peaceful change. Azerbaijan has always been a very special story of a Muslim nation with strong democratic aspirations and ethnic and religious tolerance. These attributes of our identity have been existing irrespective of the dynastic reign. Return to our Republican roots will only make them stronger.
Hello everyone. I feel like I don't belong to this format for several reasons. One is, as far as you understood from this video, I'm not the one who was supposed to be here and talking to you. The person whose video address you just saw and listened is Ilgar Mammadov, the chairman of Republican Alternative, the party which we together with our friends founded this party, and I'm a member of the board of the party. Ilgar Mammadov spent 5.5 years of his life in prison. He was jailed in 2013 when we had a presidential election, and as the European Court of Human Rights wrote in his decision, the purpose of Ilgar Mammadov's arrest was to silence him and to keep him out of the presidential election, because he was going to nominate himself for the presidency. So he spent 5.5 years in prison. He was released recently in August, and he has a travel ban, so that's why he's not here. And he is released conditionally, by the way. So still, justice is not fulfilled in his case. My second reason of being feeling uncomfortable here is that I'm not a human rights defender. I have never been, and I'm not even an NGO activist. I used to have an academic career and taught at the Baku State University law faculty. I cannot do that anymore for political reasons because I'm engaged in oppositional party. So, and also the time limit is severe. There's almost nothing left for me to talk about. So anyway, I will try to do my best. Of course, Ilgar Mammadov should have presented his personal story, and I'm not the perfect person to talk about him, even though we're close friends. But the difficulty is that it is always, even for professional biographers, it is difficult to storify the sequence of events of someone else's life. So I hope that you, and most importantly Ilgar, will forgive me if I will talk more about Real, Republican Alternative, rather about Ilgar Mammadov. And this is actually our vision in politics. So we do not personalize what we do. Because one of the problem of our country is that everything becomes too much personal. Our country is, if I may say so, under-institutionalized and over-personalized. So people pay too much attention to personalities, which goes back to some traditional ways of lives and dealings with public affairs in Azerbaijan. We want to break it, and I think we've managed to break it. We decided from the very beginning that, apart from many other mistakes that politicians can and normally do, there are two strategic mistakes that politicians should avoid. One is self-glorification. This is a typical mistake what politicians do, especially when they are in opposition and also when they are in government. They attribute all the good things to themselves, and they avoid being part of some injustices and mistakes that their policies led to. So we decided not to glorify ourselves. Whatever we do, we present it as a collective achievement. We have managed to build a collective identity for our organization, which is Real. This is a shortcut of Republican Alternative. I will tell you why we chose this name later. And of course, when you glorify yourself, you risk yourself becoming a bubble or an air balloon, and as the saying goes, the fate of the balloon is on the needle point, so you can blow up immediately at any time. Second strategical mistake that a politician can do is self-victimization. Okay, societies do feel empathy and respect to those who were victims of political repression or oppressions. In that way, Azerbaijan is no different. And of course, we do feel the support from the public, but when you enter the politics with that background, that, oh, I was victimized, I was a victim of political repression. I don't know how it works in your respective countries. In Azerbaijan, it doesn't look like a useful tool for a politician to employ, because people want to see a successful person, a person who has self-esteem, self-confidence, most importantly. And when you keep talking about your prison life or how you were victimized by the regime, you will never reach the top of the political pyramid. So we do not victimize ourselves, even though every one of us have suffered something. Of course, the greatest suffering was Ilgar Mammadov. He was in prison. I lost my job, for example, which I cannot teach anymore at the Bakü State University. Many others also left. Some lost their property, some lost their job, some lost their freedom. And we do not elaborate on that. Now, Republican Alternative, why we chose this name? Because in 2009, when we first decided to establish this organization, we saw that our country is gradually drifting away from Republican ideals and values. And as Ilgar mentioned, there was a sort of proto-monarchical waves of ruling the country. One could, for theoretical reasons, argue that democracy and monarchy do not necessarily contradict each other. I know, I used to teach that. There are 11 members of the Council of Europe are monarchies, like UK, Belgium, Netherlands, Spain, Norway, Sweden, and they're all both monarchies and democracies. So why monarchy as such should be a problem? Now, we all know where we're living, and we all know the past of our country, and we know that monarchy is not the right way. And personally, I do not believe that monarchy will be established in Azerbaijan, but still, drifting away from Republican ideals and values is one of the greatest risks that our country is facing. Now, Real is an alternative, stands for not only being an opposition to the government, which is now ruling the country, but also it's an ambition to change the system, fundamentally change the system. We're not claiming that we're better than the government. We never blame the government. In fact, all the problems and all the sufferings we have faced is also partly our choice. It's not just the government policies. We chose to go this way. We chose to live this life. So it is two-sided story. So, okay, the government offered us several opportunities. I myself was offered by the government a certain position in the government. I could have built a successful academic career. I decided to continue with what we have started in 2009, and that is why I'm still. And Ilgar have travel ban. I cannot teach at the Bakü State University. So it is also our choice. So you have to remain positive. It's not about being optimistic. Don't confuse these terms. It's about being cool about your fate. It's about staying positive about what you have been doing, and probably this is the only way of remaining and continuing the successful way of political career. Also, we have managed as Real to attract the attention of young generation. This is perhaps one of the biggest reasons that Real is successful, because we are on the wave of the generational change. And generational change in Azerbaijan is the most important change. It's unstoppable. No political force can stop it. During the last 30 years, the new generation grew up. 30 years is a very important milestone, because 30 years ago, or almost 30 years ago, Soviet Union collapsed. the colleague, professor from China, mentioned that he grew up in China or was born in China. I was born in Soviet Union, and I grew up in Soviet Union. I received Soviet education. I do not blame the past, don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is that this was a completely different system, which we were trying to get rid of. Not only in Azerbaijan, Russians themselves were trying to get rid of that system. And now we're somehow, again, trapped in what we have been trying to get rid of. This is a bit a kind of déjà vu, especially when you saw what Putin is saying and doing. And of course, Russia still have a cultural leverage on Azerbaijan because of the political past, which was, when we see what Erdogan has been doing in Turkey, and where majority of our population is Turkic, so that's why the cultural leverage of Turkey is a big factor. And when you see the Russian television is being entirely anti-Western, anti-liberal, and the Turkish television anti-Western and anti-liberal, then when you're trying to build an environment in Azerbaijan which is heavily brainwashed by Russian and Turkish television, it's a challenge. But new generation is different, and what makes us hopeful, because new generation, they have different worldview. There's some risks as well, because my generation, we consider independence of our country as the greatest achievement in the history. And by doing so, by viewing the independence as the greatest achievement of history, we somehow overlook the importance of freedom. Now, what I see in the new generation, they take independence for granted. Yes, they fight for freedom, and that is good. But in their fight for freedom, they seem to overlook the importance of independence. So what we as Real is trying to do is to bring these two concepts in peace, because freedom without independence is inconceivable, and independence without freedom is incomplete. Okay. Okay, I was confused by this clock from the very beginning. So anyway, of course, the time limit was severe, and I apologize for taking your time, especially the lady from Russia. I took your time, but I hope you will forgive me. Thank you.
Thank you. Last speaker is Natalia Gryaznevich. She started as a political activist, but meanwhile she became also a politician herself. She was running in the last parliamentary election in St. Petersburg, but what is most important, she became a spokeswoman for Open Russia movement. Open Russia is the NGO founded by Russian democracy activist Michael Khodorkovsky. We had Mr. Khodorkovsky here at the Forum 2000 4 years ago, and I'll be glad to hear with you what's new, how you continue. Please, Natalia.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here to speak at Forum 2000. And thank you for this opportunity. I'm here, but I'm not the bravest activist in Russia. And there are thousands of young people that are now protesting in the streets of Russian cities. And not all of them has the opportunity to speak and share their experience. Just now, my colleague from St. Petersburg is in chamber because he was arrested for 5 days. He just tried to make a small action on the streets of St. Petersburg, but unfortunately he was arrested. I'm press secretary of Open Russia. This is a democratic movement that was founded in 2016 after the parliamentary elections that I took part. And this organization was included to the list of undesirable organizations. This is one of the labels that Kremlin invented to mark all the opposition activists. And we are joking that if you get the label of undesirable or foreign agents and something like that, that means that you choose the right direction of your activity. So we are honored to have this label. But before I speak about our organization, I'd like to tell you a story that happened to me just 2 months ago. This story shows how our authorities try to influence the opposition. It's not only violence and arrests. It's not the only instrument they use to stop us. One day, 2 months ago, I was at home and somebody knocked at my door. When I opened the door, I saw a man, good looking, with a bouquet of flowers. He called me by my name, and I was surprised because it was a stranger. And I asked him, where you know my address and who I am. But he said, he asked me for a conversation and invited me for a coffee. When we met in a cafe, he said that he is very interested in my activity and he wants to help me. He said that he worked in Federal Security Service and offered me cooperation. He said that he knew that I was detained several times and it's not very comfortable for a girl to overnight at a police station, for example. Yes, it's not very comfortable, really. And he said that he wants to help me to stop this violence. And he said, let's be friends, as he said. We will meet once a week, and you will tell me about your activity, about your contacts, especially international contacts. It's very interesting. I was surprised with this suggestion, and I say, no, thank you. Because, but he said, are you not afraid to be an opposition activist? Because it's too dangerous in Russia. Let's be friends. It's more, you will feel safe with us. But I said that, thank you, but I feel safe enough. Because I have a lot of colleagues and friends that support me and make me feel safe. And I understood that our authorities and Federal Security Service, they know that a lot of activists throughout the country, they feel lonely. They feel that they are not supported by somebody else. And this is the right thing they found. It's right. A lot of activists now in small Russian cities, they are alone. And this is we need to do something that they don't feel lonely. And this is a job that we and my colleagues and I do. Our movement, Open Russia, in our movement, we create the space for activists when they can feel safe. We provide them legal support. We provide them educational support and opportunity to raise as an activist, to become a leader, become leaders, become politicians. Because we know that when the opportunity for democratic politicians will appear next time, we need some people who will be able to win the first free and fair elections. In the Russian history, from time to time, there is opportunity for Democrats to come to power. And we understand that this regime, the Putin's regime, will collapse without our help, because it's non-effective, because the time will destroy it. But we need to be prepared for that time. And we do not work to support one leader who will come to power and replace Putin. We work for make a lot of young democratic politicians stronger, to make them feel safe, to make them confident. Now we have 34 regional departments and some individual activists in 15 more cities of Russia. And I think that this is the most important job that we can do now, while we have no opportunity to win the elections. Personally, I took part twice in different elections, but I lost, as everybody from the opposition. In 2016, Mikhail Khodorkovsky announced a project that was called Open Elections. He announced that he will support 25 independent candidates, and it was a kind of contest. And I was one of these 25, and I'm really proud of this moment, and it helped me to develop my skills, my leadership skills, to take part in real elections. We have no chance to win, but after this election there was a team of us, and we decided to establish a movement, and we call this movement Open Russia. We start from 25 candidates to State Duma. Now we are more than 1,300 activists. And I believe that very soon we will have a very interesting time in the history of our country. Just now, the poll rate of Vladimir Putin is falling down because of economic crisis, because of the stupid reforms that he do. And just in September, we have regional elections where first in 20 years we had second round on our elections, and the candidates supported by Putin lost. And the people start believing in elections. People in Russia usually don't take part in elections because they don't believe in that. But now in these 4 regions where the candidate supported by Vladimir Putin lost, people understood that this is the chance for them. And they came to the second tour of elections. The turnout was really high. And they voted for alternative candidates, though they were not opposition candidates. They are the same people as, all the Putin's guys. And it is really good, because the elections is the only way to change the power without blood. I hope that we will never have revolution in Russia with blood, with people who will die. I hope that we will have the chance to change the power by elections. And we in Open Russia will work for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe that we have heard 5 very different but very interesting stories, and we have unfortunately no time left for questions, anything. So let me just, I hope on your behalf, to thank our participants and wish you good luck in your efforts. Thank you very much.